our lunchtime on sewage sludge. I might give people just a few minutes as they roll in, but I'll introduce myself. My name is Cornell Hanxomphou. I am the Rights Officer for the Environmental Rights Centre for Scotland, or you'll often hear us say ERCS. Just to let you all know, we are recording this session from now on, but this recording will only be viewing the speakers only, and closed captions will be available for you to toggle on. So a little bit about ERCS. We support people in Scotland to understand and exercise their rights in terms of environmental law through our awareness raising and through our free legal advice. We also advocate for policy and law reform to protect the environment and our right to live in a healthy environment. And we've got quite a few people here, so thank you for joining today. By the end of our session on sewage sludge spreading, I hope you'll have some of the answers to these three questions. Firstly, what is sewage sludge? How can it affect the environment and human health? And is the regulation and enforcement of sewage sludge spreading sufficient in Scotland? So today we'll have two wonderful speakers. Firstly, we'll have Natasha Kitching from FIDRA. FIDRA is an environmental charity supporting sustainability and preventing pollution. And then we will have Jo Hirst, who is a community campaigner who with over around 10 years of experience has been representing her community and others on the issues they have faced regarding sewage sludge spreading. So Natasha will be representing the views and experiences of FIDRA, and Jo will be representing her own views and that of the communities she has worked on with. So we had a technical glitch and have already sent an email with the resources that will be mentioned today, but you will also find the links in the chat as we go throughout the webinar. At the end of the two speakers' sessions, we'll have time for a Q&A. This will be facilitated through myself, so please send any of your questions to me in the chat and throughout the webinar, and I'll collate them at the end, and then I will ask them to, I'll open it up to Natasha and Jo. So first of all, we'll hear from Natasha. Over to you.
Hi there, I'll just share my screen. Hopefully you can all see that okay. So as mentioned by Cornell, I'm from the environmental charity FIDRA. So we're based on the east coast of Scotland in North Berwick, and our projects focus on chemical and plastic pollution in the environment. And we're currently working on a project called Sewage-Free Soils, which aims to protect our soils and the environment from the harmful contaminants that are found in sewage sludge. So I'm going to be covering briefly what sewage sludge is, how it can contaminate the environment, and I'll do a little overview of the regulation, followed by some information from our project and what we recommend. So what is sewage sludge and where does it come from? Some of you might already be aware, but for those who are not, this is a very, very simplified summary of the wastewater treatment process. So firstly, we have the wastewater and sewage from our homes travelling to the treatment plant, where the liquids are separated from the solids and treated to create a clean water resource that's then returned back to the environment. The solids that have been separated from that liquid are the sludge, and this material goes on to receive further treatment, and then it becomes treated sewage sludge or biosolids, which is the term more often used by the water industry and in agriculture. And these biosolids are supplied to farmers or land managers from the water companies. The biosolids are then applied to the soil as a fertilizer or as a soil amendment. And this can vary depending on your farm, depending on the type of crop, or if you are managing livestock on the farm too. So overall, this is seen as a good use of waste resources, particularly when we're trying to move towards a circular economy, and it would also reduce the reliance on chemical fertilizers. However, something that's not considered throughout this process are the many chemical and plastic contaminants that are within the wastewater and sewage that comes from our homes. So if we think about the very first step, everything that goes down our drains and our washing machines, etc., there's a lot of contaminants present. So things like microfibers in your clothes, chemicals like PFAS in cleaning products, pharmaceuticals, and many more. These all make their way to the treatment plant, and they actually become concentrated within the sludge material when it's separated from the clean water resource that's produced. They're then not accounted for in any of the treatment processes that occur. And so they end up still being within the sludge that's supplied to the farmers and still in the sludge that's applied directly to the land. So unfortunately, I don't have time to go through all of the contaminants because there is quite a lot of them, but I'll just go through a couple. So firstly, we have PFAS, which are a group of over 10,000 man-made chemicals that are extremely persistent. They're sometimes referred to as forever chemicals, so you might have heard them in the papers recently being called that. It's been found that some PFAS can actually take over 1,000 years to degrade in typical soil conditions. So you can imagine how quickly they can build up in the environment if they're continuously being applied. And these chemicals are actually present in tons of everyday products. So from your non-stick pan to your waterproof jacket and even on your TV. Can't really escape PFAS at the moment. So it is inevitably going to end up within waste streams and then within the sludge. It's been linked to many human health concerns. So things like immune system disorders, cancers, infertility, and it's also been found to have impacts on wildlife too. And as you can see here at the bottom, in terms of soil, it's been shown to negatively impact the soil health in many ways. And it can also spread to nearby other environments nearby, such as watercourses. And there was actually a study that found PFAS in otters in the UK, and they found that one of the main sources of the PFAS were nearby farms using sewage sludge on their land. And so it just showed you the sort of connectivity and how far it can travel from being within the sludge. Next up, we have microplastics, which I'm sure you have all heard of this one. So these have similar impacts on the soil and on the wider environment. They have the ability to impact the nutrient cycling and the productivity of the soils. And they can also act as transport for other nasty chemicals too. There's quite a lot of them within sludge. A Swedish wastewater treatment plant actually found that 99% of the microplastics that entered the treatment plant ended up in the final sludge product. So basically nearly all of the microplastics that were in that first stage of the process coming from our homes ended up in the product that was applied to the land, so extremely high percentage. And other chemicals that could be present in the sludge that I've not mentioned would be things like bisphenols, such as BPA, pharmaceuticals, and flame retardants, which can come off things like furniture. So how has this happened and why are these not regulated? Well, this table shows just a few of these contaminants and how they fit into the regulation. We can see here that there's evidence for all of them being present, but only a couple are regulated. So we've got the potentially toxic elements such as metals being monitored and controlled through the mandatory UK sludge use in agriculture regulations. And then we've got the pathogens, which are controlled through voluntary measures under the UK Biosolids Assurance Scheme. Recently, the Scottish Government proposed the environmental authorisations regulations, which do mention the inclusion of some of these voluntary measures within the mandatory regulation, so kind of merging the two. So we could be seeing a green tick in the second column for pathogens soon, However, the rest of these still remain unregulated as they're not currently covered by either of the regulations. So what do we want to see in the regulation, basically? Well, as I've just mentioned, we do welcome the incorporation of some of these voluntary aspects into the mandatory regulation, but we do want to see those mentioned harmful contaminants also included. We're particularly concerned about PFAS and microplastics in the environment and also contaminating the food chain as a result of sludge application. And we would also ask that any new regulations would follow the contaminant considerations mentioned within the European Commission's review of their sewage sludge directive that's currently ongoing. So just going back to our project a little bit, what do farmers think about this? We wanted to find this out, so we carried out a farmer survey just to gauge the general farmer opinion of the use of sewage sludge and figure out why they would choose to use it or why they wouldn't choose to use it. And we had 54 farmers from across the UK, and nearly half of them had previously used or currently use biosolids on their land. So it was quite a good mix. And we found out that the main influential factors in their choice of materials that they applied to their land were the organic matter provision, the fact that they were good use of resources, and ultimately the price and the availability of the material, which is kind of what we expected. We found that most farmers were aware of the presence of contaminants and that 89% were concerned about the risks from applying these contaminants to their land. We also asked them about the regulation, and 84% of the participants would welcome tighter regulation and monitoring of biosolids for the contaminants. So quite similar views to what we have. So with all of this information, what does FIDRA recommend? Well, in our eyes, the current agricultural use of sewage sludge is not managed in a completely safe and environmentally beneficial way. The sludge use in agriculture regulations need to be updated as soon as possible. There needs to be an increased focus on upstream wastewater solutions to prevent these contaminants of concern entering the sludge in the first place. Similarly, with the downstream sewage sludge solutions, commitments into new technologies. I was just at the European Wastewater Conference a couple of weeks ago, and there were several presentations about PFAS and pharmaceutical remover in the wastewater treatment process. So we know that removing these contaminants from the sludge is extremely challenging, but there's a lot of research that is definitely underway at the moment. We also recommend that the monitoring and testing of the harmful substances should improve, and it should reflect up-to-date evidence. At FIDRA, we advocate the precautionary principle. So if the European review that I previously mentioned provides evidence to regulate these contaminants, then we believe that the UK should also support this. But currently, as it stands, sewage sludge is not a clean or safe resource. So we would recommend halting its use until that can be proven otherwise. So thanks for listening. I'll leave you with this little infographic here. If anyone would like me to send through any of the references or resources mentioned in the presentation, then feel free to email me after the webinar. Thanks.
Thanks, Natasha. Thank you for that overview of what sewage sludge is, very in-depth, and also the work that FIDRA is doing. I will now hand over to Joe Hirst.
Hello. My name is Jo Hirst, as you know, and together with my colleague Doreen Goldie, I've been campaigning against the spreading of sewage sludge on agricultural land in Scotland for over the past 15 years. We've been highlighting in particular the possible risks to human and animal health, risks to the wider environment and the long-term implications. And we've especially highlighted or tried to highlight to various people the impact on local residents and local communities from the spreading of sewage sludge by their neighbours on farms, etc. So, as members of our local community council, we were initially contacted by numerous members of the public and other concerned community councils because they'd experienced significant impacts due to the spreading of sewage sludge. The principal issue raised by rural residents in various communities is the horrid stench which emanates from the fields spread with sludge fertiliser. The proximity of the spreading near to homes, villages and schools is a principal issue, and as is the amount of the sewage sludge which is being spread. A number of residents have recorded in great detail the number of lorries delivering to particular sites, and they have been able to estimate the volume of sludge being spread, which is in amounts way in excess of the guidelines that Natasha's already referred to. We've also experienced issues with sludge on surrounding roads, which is spillage from delivery vehicles, and then that impact when people have walked through it, driven through it, it's then been trodden into homes and on people's property. And we're finding as well that the impact of the stench means that properties are being impacted on valuations. So people's premises are no longer worth what they were because they're in areas that are being saturated by sewage sludge spreading. So as a consequence of all these reports, and having experienced the impact of sewage spreading ourselves, because neighbours of mine spread it on their land, and it's spread all across the area, we decided to investigate further, and we discovered the following. And I must apologise because there's going to be a bit of repetition here from some of the stuff that Natasha's been over, but I think it's useful just to know what we found out over the past 15 years. So essentially, sewage sludge, or biosolids as it is referred to, is the residue left after the sewage treatment process is complete. It's often dried and it's used as a fertiliser. We believe it's not a safe material, and research that we have studied has found that sewage sludge contains waste from industry, laboratories, hospitals, funeral parlours. In fact, all the waste that's flushed down sinks and drains. It's a mixture of the residue from human faeces, from industrial effluent, waste from laboratories, hospitals, funeral parlours, dental waste, veterinary waste and drugs residue, and that includes contraceptives, endocrine disruptors, antidepressants, statins, amphetamines, formaldehyde, waste oils and fat, cleaning fluids, bleach, etc., and the list goes on. So this toxic mass presents dangers which fall into three main categories. Number one, hormones and synthetic hormones, prion contamination, and lastly, toxin contamination. So firstly, if we look at hormone and synthetic hormone contamination, in 2012, scientists at the University of Aberdeen studied sheep maintained on pastures that were fertilised with sewage sludge, and they found a high incidence of abnormalities in the animals. The abnormalities were being attributed to the presence of man-made hormones, and particularly those found in the contraceptive pill in the treated waste that was being spread on the land. They found that exposure to the chemicals in sewage sludge affected the structure or function of testes, ovaries, uteri, parts of the brain, and thyroid and adrenal glands of sheep fetuses. And in adult sheep, there were changes in bone structure, the testes, and they were observing different behaviours in offspring. The researchers explained that man-made chemicals known to be endocrine disruptors found in such things as electrical equipment, building materials, plastics, adhesives, paints, vehicle exhausts have long been considered a health hazard. However, the synthetic hormones found in the contraceptive pills known as progestins, which mimic progesterone, either alone or combined with estrogen and excreted in human waste, pose a far greater problem because they're not removed or destroyed by the sewage treatment procedure, and they find their way into the food chain. So quotes from the Science Festival include, "These chemicals are in our air, soil and water. Some are fat soluble and may accumulate in our bodies, whilst others are water soluble and end up passing through us and being flushed down the toilet, entering into our environment where they may affect other animals or enter our food chain, exposing humans to the dangers." And that was Dr. Rind at the festival. His colleague, Professor Fowler, added, "These chemicals may be associated with disruptions of many different physiological systems and increased incidences of disease and reproductive deficiencies, such as those that have been reported in a variety of species, including humans. Embryos, fetuses, and young animals appear to be particularly vulnerable. It is notable that incidences of breast cancer and testicular cancer and fertility problems in humans are increasing, while populations of animal groups as diverse as amphibians and honeybees are now in decline." The Aberdeen scientists told the British Science Festival their effects on ecosystems and human health could be as significant as climate change. So, research into the fertility of sheep exposed to endocrine disruptors in the environment by Dr. Michelle Bellingham of the University of Glasgow in 2014 found that abnormalities could result in low sperm counts. And that was found in 42% of the animals studied. And that left her to suggest that the rise in the use of IV fertilization in humans, particularly as a result of low sperm counts, is due to exposure to these chemicals in the environment and in sewage sludge. So exposure to such environmental chemicals has been hypothesized to account for the high and the increasing incidence of male reproductive disorders in humans, such as testicular germ cell cancer, hypospadias, and some cases of low sperm count. Then we move on to prion contamination. So typical wastewater processes do not degrade prions. Prions are virtually indestructible rogue proteins that cause incurable brain infections such as mad cow disease and its human equivalent, which is variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. They are difficult to inactivate. They resist extreme heat, chemical disinfections, and irradiation. Until now, scientists don't know whether prions entering the sewers and septic tanks from slaughterhouses, meatpacking facilities, or private game dressing could survive and pass through conventional sewage plant treatment plants. However, recent simulated wastewater treatment shows that prions cannot be recovered from wastewater sludge after 20 days. They remain in the biosolids and then they're used as the fertilizer on the fields. Then finally, we studied toxin contamination. We found that there are 27 heavy metals found in sewage sludge. None of the toxic organic chemicals it contains are regulated and they fail to be monitored. Not even priority pollutants, which include pesticides, pharmaceuticals, and plasticizers, are regulated in sewage sludge. Many of these poisons are accumulative. The sewage sludge matrix dates back to 1998, and the best available technique guidelines are not enforceable. Responsibility for the monitoring and the regulation of the industry falls currently to SEPA, Scottish Water, and to local authorities, none of whom currently have the powers to enforce the meagre and outdated legislation that currently exists, and all of them blame each other for the lack of enforcement or management of the issues. In 2014, 1 in 6 children suffered from some form of developmental abnormality, and the causes are mostly unknown. Some environmental chemicals are known to cause brain damage, and many more are suspected of it, but few had been tested for such damage. The brain's development is uniquely sensitive to toxic chemicals, and even small amounts may negatively impact our academic achievements, economic success, risk of delinquency, and quality of life. Chemicals such as lead, mercury, PCBs, arsenic, and certain solvents and pesticides pose an insidious threat to the development of the next generation's brains. All of these chemicals are present in sewage sludge. When chemicals in the environment affect the development of a child's brain, he or she is at risk of cognitive deficits, learning disabilities, more serious mental retardation, ADHD, autism, cerebral palsy, and other disorders that remain for a lifetime. So we then found out that additional risks that come from sewage sludge include that it's a venue for pathogen transfer. Land application of sewage sludge can lead to the transport of pathogens through bioaerosols downwind of sludge storage or spreading sites. We found our experiences that large volumes of sewage sludge have been retained and stored for excessive periods of time, sometimes in excess of 2, 3, and 4 years. We have photographs where we've seen animals, we've seen newborn lambs laid on piles of sewage sludge, and we've got photographs of that, which we've shown various authorities. So we know that the sewage sludge is being stored for well in excess of the periods of time that are recommended, and we think this poses a serious risk. So pathogens can be transported to humans who walk through sludge when it's spread on fields. Wild animals, farm animals, birds, rodents, and pets may become infected or may transmit sludge pathogens. We're also concerned about the bioaerosol risk. A recent study from the University of Arizona shows that the risk of windborne pathogens is significant within a 10-kilometre radius of any sludge that is spread. And in Scotland, the relatively cooler and wetter climate may actually increase this risk. There's also a risk to water and watercourses because sludge contains a high concentration of waste. Indeed, a 100-acre spread of sewage sludge represents the annual fecal output of approximately 1,400 people, plus the industrial waste component. Heavy rainfall can result in the washing of contaminants into local watercourses and lochs. Fish farms are particularly at risk as any contamination would be lethal. And we've been contacted by a fish farm that was completely and utterly destroyed due to the leakage of sewage sludge. And we therefore consider there's also a risk to food. The industry guidelines recommend that farmers observe a waiting period between sludge spreading and the harvesting of some crops, and recommend that farmers restrict farm animals from fields recently spread with sewage sludge. These recommendations are not enforceable under current legislation. Therefore, sludge spread fields can be used to grow small fruits such as strawberries or pasture livestock, including milking herds, and thus exposure to the consumer to contaminated products and meats is possible. We're also aware that farmers are recommended to either plough in or inject sewage sludge onto their land. Invariably, this fails to happen. It's spread and it's just left on the surface, and it can be washed away by excessive rainfall and all sorts of other bits and pieces. So we move on then to animal transfer. Farm animals and pets such as cats and dogs can be expected to continue to travel through fields even after fields have been spread with sludge, and then they return to their owners' homes. They can spread sewage sludge to the family home. Birds may also visit sewage sludge spread fields and spread viruses, bacteria, and parasites in subsequent droppings. We're also aware of a study that was carried out at York University in 2019, and that identified that sewage sludge was impacting on the voice boxes of birds, and as a result, there was a 40% drop in reproduction because of the damage caused to their vocal cords. They were no longer able to mate because they couldn't sing, and they had been feeding on fields that were spread with sewage sludge in the York area. Storage, we know that rainy weather makes sludge spreading particularly risky for runoff and groundwater contamination, and the Scottish climate is particularly poor in this regard. We're also aware of antibiotic resistance. The spreading of sewage sludge on agricultural land has also been linked to an increase in antimicrobial resistance, known as AMR, and has some responsibility for the release of resistance-driving chemicals into the environment. A recent study, which was published in November 2023, stated that AMR threatens the effectiveness of drug therapies to treat bacterial infections. It is predicted to become the leading cause of mortality in the future, including economic consequences. It was presumed that AMR was primarily acquired in the clinical environment for years. However, it's now accepted that the acquisition of AMR genes or mutations might also occur elsewhere, including in soil, water, wastewater, food, and gut. And it would appear that this study does support our concerns. We're also concerned about foodborne viruses. They're also a problem as they're excreted in high numbers in human feces and are transmitted by the fecal oral route. The two most frequently linked viruses with foodborne outbreaks, such as identified as the foodborne viruses with the highest priority worldwide, are norovirus and hepatitis A virus. Both have been proved to be present in sewage sludge, and therefore the viral presence in soil may increase the risk of fresh produce contamination. So our excuse me, our conclusion from the studies that we've carried out and the reading that we've done is that pathogen levels in sewage sludge are high and can even increase over time once the sludge has been stored and then applied to land. Land application allows sludge pathogens to be transported by weather events and facilitates the spread of diseases to animals and humans. And we believe it's totally unreasonable to expect rural residents to tolerate exposure to these diseases in land, air, and water. So, community actions that have been carried out to date. Communities across Scotland have raised their concerns over sewage sludge for the past 20 years. The first petition was raised in the Scottish Government by communities in the Borders in 2004. Doreen and I have worked tirelessly to hold public bodies to account. In 2014, we wrote to 14 different bodies and organisations raising our concerns. Those bodies included the SNH, the NFU, Falkirk Council Environmental Health Department, local councillors, MSPs, SEPA, Scottish Water, the Scottish Government and the United Nations in 2017, who we were asked to do a presentation for. In 2014 and 2015, particular community events, such as the cancellation of a primary school sports day, as the children were physically vomiting in the playground due to the stench of sewage sludge spread on the fields surrounding the school, a sickening stench that was reported in Kinross and Lochleven by local residents, the flooding of a local resident's garden and part of their home with sludge which was washed off the neighbouring farmer's land after heavy rain, complaints and concerns received from residents in East Lothian relating to the impact of sewage sludge spreading on their lives, which were reported to their MSP, who in turn recommended that they contact us because we were known as by the Scottish Government to be experts in this field, despite the fact we were merely local community campaigners. So this led us to raise a petition to the Scottish Parliament in 2015. This resulted in the Scottish Government finally agreeing to reviewing sewage sludge use, but the process has been agonisingly slow and to date without any tangible results. In 2016, the Scottish Government published the Review of Storage and Spreading of Sewage Sludge on Land in Scotland that was known as the Sludge Review. 21 key recommendations were made, none of which have been implemented to date. In 2018, in response to our continued complaints, the Scottish Government commissioned the James Hutton Institute to produce an updated health risk assessment of sewage sludge, including a consultation with stakeholders and local communities, which we organised and participated in. The final report that was produced was in 5 parts, and it was not made public. In June 2021, we contacted the ERCS for legal advice and assistance. They have been extremely helpful, and the James Hutton report was eventually disclosed on the 17th of October 2021 and published for public view. However, it had been amended at the request of the Scottish Government officials, which calls into question its impartiality. Once the report was made public online, we felt that it didn't address fully the public concerns regarding the regulatory and enforcement failures, and we commented on this in writing to great extent. The report made a number of recommendations to mitigate risks to human health, including odours, but to date, none of these have been implemented. The spreading of sewage sludge has been banned in a number of European countries, and to date, they include Denmark, France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. And I think Germany has done it recently as well, but I can't confirm exactly when. So we would question why it's still acceptable that sewage sludge is being spread on agricultural land in Scotland. So our ultimate aim remains the same and is but the same as FIDRA's. We must stop spreading sewage sludge on agricultural land until such times as it can be proved beyond any reasonable doubt it is safe, beneficial, and does not impact in any way on human or animal health. And that's my, and I have a list of I've got a list of all those resources and studies that were carried out if anybody would like them. And I also have a comprehensive list, which is about 4 pages long, that details all the representations that we've made on behalf of ourselves or communities or community members between 2009 and 2023.
Thank you, Joe. And if you want any of that Joe's experience and knowledge in writing, we have written a Voices for Justice blog on our website, which provides a bit of a summary on all of that. So thanks again, Joe and Natasha, for sharing your knowledges and experiences and taking the time out of your days to do that. It's really clear that there are a large number of contaminants within sewage sludge that can potentially pose a health risk to humans, to animals. Can increase antimicrobial resistance, which has bigger implications. The farmers are generally quite aware of this going around the UK based off FIDRA's survey, and there's that concern that still remains there, whether regulation is doing enough. There is a lot of unknown risk of how much this is affecting the environment, but based off of the amount of instances and nuisances and complaints and concerns that Joe's received over the 15 years, it is quite an ongoing significant issue in Scotland, especially with the odor as well and how that affects. I mean, hearing children vomiting because of the odor of sewage sludge is not okay in any way possible, in any way, shape, or form. And terms of responsibility and enforcement and the resources to do so, we have not seen sufficiently to date anything that allows us to properly regulate. And that is why I see Natasha and Joe asking for the halting of the use of sewage sludge on agricultural land. So I also wanted to share some information with you. There is a campaign in England called Fighting Dirty. Now, they were granted permission for a High Court hearing to challenge the Environment Agency in England over its decision to axe their commitment to have sewage sludge tested for microplastics and forever chemicals, which is PFAS, before it is spread on agricultural land as fertilizer. This hearing was held on the 9th of July, and so we're still waiting results of that. So I encourage you to have a look out for that. And I also want to mention there was a new and revised sewage sludge regulations, which were mentioned by Joe and were proposed as part of the consultation for the 2018 Environmental Authorizations Regulations. Now, Joe, FIDRA, and ourselves at ERCS have all fed into this, and now that consultation is closed, and we are waiting to hear the next steps, but happy to talk more about that as we move on to the Q&A.